Welcome to the launch of the Leave Alliance. The Leave Alliance consists of a network of new and established political groups, bloggers and tweeters, all seeking to win the referendum to leave the EU. The strategy that unites us is the belief that after 40 years of integration into the EU, we can only realistically, practically and safely leave the EU if we follow a clear plan. The plan we support is called Flexit, the market solution, a copy of which is on your seats. Supporting a clear exit plan makes the Leave Alliance, thus far, unique amongst the other declared Leave groups, who we are keen to help over this referendum campaign. This six-stage plan advocates a continuous process rather than a single event to extract us from the EU. Article 50 from the Treaty on European Union provides a 2-year period for negotiations, but this will only be the start of the process of returning us to an independent, self-governing nation, taking our own place in our own right at the world's top table. Importantly, we believe that initially we will need to remain in the single market, which consists, as you should know, of 27 EU member states and, of course, Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein from the European Free Trade Association. Our longer-term aim, which is stage 3 of Flexit, is to create a genuine free trade area amongst the 51 countries that make up the continent of Europe. This would be administered under the umbrella of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Now, the main components of the Leave Alliance, represented on the top table today, will introduce themselves and explain who they are, and each has promised me that they will keep their introductions down to 2 minutes each. And I want to start with John Ashworth. John Ashworth is the founder and director of Restore Britain's Fish. Restore Britain's Fish started life as Save Britain's Fish, but under the disastrous common fisheries policy, we now need to restore rather than save, and not save our fishing industry. John.
Restore Britain's Fish readily supports the aims and strategy of the Leave Alliance. Today we have a new fisheries booklet out, which you can find at the back of the hall. This booklet covers the whole sordid 43-year affair, with not only the common fisheries policy, but the suicidal involvement with the European Union project. The eradication of our nation started the moment we joined in 1973 under Edward Heath, and continues to the present day under David Cameron. The remainders, under the disguise of the meaningless word reform, take us relentlessly to the new nation of Europe. The common fisheries policy is at the forefront of that final destination. A rigid political structure that has and still is causing an environmental disaster, having turned many of our vessels into scrap and our fishing towns and villages into decay, all because the resource bestowed on the British people by international law through a British Act of Parliament has been given away by our Parliament. What were British waters are now European Union waters, with a European Union fishing fleet. We say enough is enough. We, the people, want our 200-mile median line zone back. We want it back under British control, so we can set about operating our nation's assets in a manner free of politics and the integration into a supernatural system, so that it's beneficial to our people, the marine environment, in Europe in general, and to do that means one thing: we must leave the European Union.
The Leave Alliance is fortunate to have the support and backing of Robert Olds from the Bruges Group, which was founded in 1989 and was inspired by Margaret Thatcher's Bruges Group speech in 1988. Thirdly, then, Pete North represents the Bloggers Army. Pete also runs our official website, The Leave Alliance, and heads up our committed tweeters. Pete.
Well, what we're largely about is controlling the message online, and while we see newspapers becoming less influential all the time, they're now competing on a level playing field on Twitter, and the stomping ground for columnists is the hashtags, and that's where they get their information across. Our blog unit can act as a rebuttals unit, and we can challenge other opinion formers by presenting the view that Brexit need not be a leap in the dark, and that we do have a comprehensive Brexit plan. It's through coordinated action and strategic blogging that we can inject new arguments and effectively influence the influential. In this, we can also equip other campaigners and supporters with the tools that they need to win the online arguments. We can use our collective skills to dominate hashtags, forums, any internet platform we can find, and we can lay down breadcrumbs so we can guide readers to our natural conclusions. The mission is to diffuse scaremongering and to promote Flexit and the comprehensive Brexit plan, lay down our vision of what Brexit really looks like, what we want as an outcome, and largely to push forward the idea of an agile, independent state, rediscovering its role in international affairs and revitalising our domestic democracy.
Very good.
Thank you, Pete. Now, fourth, Anthony Schofield, the director of the think tank Futurus. Futurus was founded in 2003 to develop an understanding and analysis of major political and social problems not being addressed by the British political parties. Anthony.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Well, I just tell you a little bit about myself, only about 3 or 4 lines. 22 years ago, in my offices in Regent Street, I hosted a meeting at which was formed a new political party called UKIP. Alan Sked then was the leader of it. That party, which is nothing to do with me nowadays, but it has gone on to become easily the most successful new national political party since the rise of the Labour Party in the 19th century. And personally, after a few years of in the front line, I fought numerous elections, and I worked very closely with the No campaign, the No to the Euro. I then decided to take a back seat and set up a think tank to look into a lot of issues much more thoroughly. And obviously one of those issues is the EU, and I'm a member of the Bruges Group and also the Campaign for an Independent Britain. I won't analyse it too much. The EU is obviously an unusual, indeed unique organisation, quite unlike EFTA, NATO and the Commonwealth. And here I have the NATO Treaty. That's it. That is it. 2 pages of A4. But signed in 1949. There are 1 or 2 geographical protocols. That's it. The EU is not an agreement between governments. It is a superior body over governments. And British business and British politicians find that quite difficult to understand, although I think they're beginning to understand now. The referendum then is about who governs, not about business. Business under our proposals will carry on more or less as normal. And the unique nature of the EU means that it is incompatible with self-governing democracy. And I particularly like the quote from Enoch Powell the day after the last 1975 EU referendum, when everybody was saying, may the best man has won, and everyone should come together and all that stuff. Enoch Powell very rightly said about the yes majority, it is no more than provisional. And he said that because it was indeed correct. And God, he's turned out to be dead right, hasn't he? So our aspiration, and let's talk about aspiration, restoring self-government to the British people. Our aim, we need a clear aim, a clear plan and a timetable. And voters will respond to that clarity. Our aim can be defined as basically leaving the political, judicial and monetary structures of the EU. It is not necessary to leave the single market, and you'll hear more about that later. The clear plan to restore self-government is laid out in the Flexit market solution, which again you'll hear a lot more from Richard North shortly. This is the definitive EU exit plan, and I would like to pay tribute to Robert Olds, Richard North and the late Peter Troy for the work they've done on that. And I have ventured to lay out a clear timetable in a new publication which is available over there called The Rival Plans. Of course, it is not a strict timetable, it is an indicative timetable. And I would simply say, lastly, to vote Remain is a very risky decision. I met Michael Portillo twice in recent times. The first time a few months ago, he told me that British politicians and the EU leaders will regard such a vote to Remain, as a blank cheque. He should know about these sort of things. And he did confirm to me a couple of days ago that he would be voting to leave, and that was still his view. So to vote Remain will again be no more than provisional. Now there's quite a lot of literature over there, but maybe you don't want to read that, it's all free. But there's one particular thing I want to just draw very briefly your attention to, which is there's on a thing called the Rival Plans. On the back of that there is a comparison of the Cameron situation, the Cameron proposals, and the Leave Alliance proposal. I only draw attention to you because I've found that this has been very well received. This particular one sheet of this particular book has been very well received, and it's a very easy aide-memoire to have in your hand.
Right, on to the next, the Harrogate Agenda. Now I speak for that as its director. It is a comparatively new political movement. It is named after its inaugural meeting in Harrogate in the summer of 2012. And its aim is to improve the UK system of government by making it for the first time truly democratic. It is not a political party and will remain totally independent, with its success coming from attracting the support of people from all political backgrounds or none at all, who, like us, are or will become convinced that nothing much will change at Westminster until the system is fundamentally reformed. In the manner of the Chartists, we also have 6 demands, which centre on our core principle that the people must be recognised as sovereign, and thus the ultimate source of power. In just the same way as sovereignty was once wrestled from the monarch to Parliament, so we believe, and it is long overdue, that the source of power must pass from Parliament to reside with the people. Our demands form the 6th and final stage of Flexit, the market solution. We believe that without reforming our system of governance, there would be nothing stopping our politicians again handing back power to Brussels, even if we voted to leave. We, of course, realise that none of our 6 demands can be enacted while we remain politically subservient to the moribund EU, which is why, as part of the Leave Alliance, we are fighting to win the referendum so we can embark on the process of leaving, which we are clear will lead to a freer, brighter future for this country. And next, Edward Spalton, who's the chairman of the Campaign for an Independent Britain. The CIB was founded in 1969 as a cross-party coalition to oppose the entry into the then common market. This gives it the distinction of being the oldest Eurosceptic group in existence. In case you have forgotten, we were taken into the common market in 1973 without being asked, and this decision was then confirmed in the referendum of 1975. Edward.
Thank you very much, Neil. Well, our campaign, known generally as CIB, is, I think, possibly the senior of the independence movement. And I'm also very heartened to have present with us this afternoon Lord Stoddart of Swindon, who was one of the founder members and under whom I served my apprenticeship before becoming chairman of the organisation. When the MPs who were organising themselves as CIB failed to prevent the passage of the European Communities Act 1972 by a margin of 8 votes, the organisation continued to keep the flame of opposition and resistance alive. Literature and events publicised the anti-democratic structure of the European project throughout the wilderness years and to this day. And nowadays we work closely with other organisations acting as a facilitator and a force multiplier in the referendum campaign. While CIB has done much to expose the damage done to our constitution and freedoms by EU membership, less thought was given to the mechanism by which we would leave the EU and establish a new constructive relationship with our European neighbours. The enemies of democratic self-government portray such a step as a dangerous leap in the dark. Well, thanks to thorough research, the Flexit market solution provides the safe means of a seamless transition to independence whilst retaining full access to the EU market. It is not a risky leap, but a confident step from the smoke and mirrors of the EU into a wider and sunnier world. And because the arrangements which underpin it already exist, it provides a secure, proven platform for our further development as an independent nation.
Last but by no means least, Dr. Richard North provides intellectual thought and analysis of the Leave Alliance through his premier blog, EU Referendum, which he started in 2004. He's the main author of Flexit, the Market Solution, being helped by many of the readers of his blog and by Robert Olds of the Bruges Group. Richard, along with the journalist Christopher Booker, wrote the must-read book on the EU called The Great Deception, which has recently been reprinted. So, that concludes now the individual introductions, and I'll now ask Dr. Richard North to give his 15-minute presentation on our strategy, which we all agree is the only way we will actually beat the fear, uncertainty and doubt, or FUD, which is currently the main strand of the Remains campaign. I'm sure you have already picked up on the often repeated lines that leaving the EU will be a leap in the dark. So if Leavers really want to win this coming referendum, then the strategy you're about to hear is how it can be done seamlessly and painlessly, making it instead a step for the UK into the light and a brighter future. Richard.
It's great to see so many faces. This is absolutely wonderful. It gives us a real boost because today, whether you like it or not, you are part of history because we are actually starting a campaign to win the referendum. I can't tell you whether it will end on the 23rd of June. I suspect it won't. But however long it takes, whether it's 5 years, 10 years or 50 years, the end of this campaign is that we leave the EU, however long it takes. Now, we've got ourselves together to form the Leave Alliance, and what I'm going to take you through is a public declaration of strategy, as I say, missing from all the existing Leave campaigners who don't seem to be able to get their act together or think coherently, so actually what it takes to win the referendum. And this is the key issue. It's not about providing ourselves a platform to air our prejudices or to give ourselves bonus points or to make ourselves good or to contribute to the feel-good factor. It is about winning. And winning means strategy. Now, our strategy also has to be articulated simply, fundamental principles that people can walk away with and understand and execute clearly without having to sit behind a calculator or an iPad and think through and calculate what it's going to be. And we've broken it down to 3 core principles which work, which are fundamentally sound, and which we think will achieve what we want, that essential feature of winning. Now, the point we're going to be looking at is about engagement with the enemy, and it's the real enemy. What's happening, of course, is that people are allowing themselves to be distracted and indulging themselves in petty little squabbles with Remainers and with the general Europhile community, instead of focusing on the single individual who represents the entire Remain movement, which is the Prime Minister, David Cameron. He is the enemy. He is the man standing up in front of Parliament lying. He is the man that's devising the strategy. He is the man who's doing the negotiation. He is the man in charge of the government. He is our enemy. Bring him down and the prestige that goes with him, and we are 9/10 towards winning. Waste your time frittering away with vain, fruitless arguments with any number of Remainers, and all you're doing is expending your energy to no effect whatsoever. So largely I regard, and of course this is what it's there for, I regard the Remain campaign as a complete distraction. It's not an issue. Let them waste their time. Our target for tonight, gentlemen, is Mr. Cameron. Needless to say, that any campaign has to be intelligence-led. There's too much prejudice in the front and far too little intelligence, and some of it wears blonde hair. As such, that those of you who are military aficionados will recognize that the absolute core point in any campaign is to recognize and identify the Schwerpunkt, i.e. the main thrust of the enemy. Once you blunt that, only then can you turn it round and start providing your own neutralization, and then finally your counterattack. So hidden in there, or embedded, should I say, rather than hidden, is we've got the last three issues. Is we've got to identify the thrust of the enemy's attack, and we're already fairly clear on what that is. Mr. Cameron is running with the idea that leaving is a leap in the dark. We have to neutralise that claim, and then we have to come out with our own counterattack to provide a clear alternative. And it's there that our three-point strategy begins to coalesce. Nothing like a simple acronym, and as they say, you've not made it in this world until you've distilled your life down into a three-letter acronym. DOR, open that door. Now, the first issue is to debunk Mr. Cameron's claim to have renegotiated a new relationship with Europe, or European Union, as we will prefer. Now, there's some very short memories in this world, and particularly within the media and the campaign groups. Mr. Cameron made several times a cast iron promise, you might have remembered that term, to go to Brussels and to come back with a treaty. He didn't come back with a treaty. He couldn't come back with a treaty. It is not possible to come back with a treaty in the timescale without going through the treaty procedures. So he has come back from Brussels pretending, rather like he did with the veto. He came back with a pretend veto, and now he's coming back with a pretend treaty and trying to convince the public and the media that he has got this treaty, and this represents a renegotiation with Brussels, with the European Union. In order to achieve this wonderful feat, he has adopted a very significant and clever strategy, which is called, technically, I believe, lying. He has lied consciously and openly in front of Parliament, which in its own bovine way has sat there and allowed him to lie to the House. The media has sat there in its own ignorant and, I'm afraid, lackluster way and allowed him to get away with it. But the polls which YouGov and other assiduous polling agencies have shown us is that had it been recognised that Mr. Cameron would come back with no deal, it should have given us between 15 and 20 points lead on the polls as we stand as of now. On the other hand, if he'd come back with a good deal, which he pretends to have but hasn't, it would have given him 20 points. The fact that we're now neck and neck means that we have failed to lodge with the public the fact that our Prime Minister is lying to us. So the first strategy, and it's absolutely essential strategy, even if the media's given up on it, even if Parliament's given up on it, our first strategy is to repeat, repeat, and repeat again this terrifying prospect that we have a Prime Minister selling us a deal on the basis of a lie. And of course, we can analyse this very carefully. We've done it on the blog. There's plenty of material which supports the very, very, very carefully worked out illustration that the man is lying. He has not got a valid treaty. Nothing on that piece of paper is worth actually the paper it isn't printed on. Now, we then move into territory where, again, our campaigning organisations are not putting their brains together and not thinking. We have spent 40 years or so telling the public how terrible the EU is. We have seen the newspapers filled with horror stories about how bad Brussels was. And we are still in the European Union, and we are still, depending on which polls you read, slightly ahead for the Remains. Now, it is a matter of logic that if these horror stories were going to achieve the result we needed, by now we would be leaping ahead in the polls. And therefore, it is pretty obvious that simply to repeat again and again and again this list of horror stories is not going to cut it. And of course, numerous focus groups, including some initially carried out by the precursor to Vote Leave, deduced, and it didn't take very much deduction, that the crucial element of a referendum campaign is, in order to make that leap, people have to be reassured that they are going somewhere safe and somewhere positive, and that it's worth the effort of actually doing it. You cannot just say, well, let's try it and see, or as so many people are doing, let's think that it'll be all right on the night. No, we have to have a credible offer, a credible vision. We have to tell people why it's worth doing and what it means to them, both in terms of the nation as a whole and of them as individuals. And it doesn't have to be very long. Here it is in the document, and it actually is less than 1 page of A5. So the vision doesn't have to be complicated, but it does have to be illuminating, and it has to be clearly expressed. But then the big issue is the credibility gap, is how do we get there? And anybody can stand up and say, the sunlit uplands are there awaiting for you. But how do you get there? And it's that which no one of these high-profile speakers or any of these campaigning groups are able to do. They're all over the place, and as the Prime Minister is rightly saying yesterday, they really are all over the place, making it up as they go along. Well, we have to provide a clear reassurance that not only is it worth leaving, but it is practicable and safe. And the way we do that is absolutely crucial to this campaign. Now, let's reinforce those issues. Dave's dodgy deal, the alliteration works. Not Dave's dodgy dossier. Why they allowed themselves to get distracted in that, I don't know. Dave's dodgy deal is the issue. It's not legally binding, and it can't be legally binding because it is not a valid treaty. And if you want to see what a valid treaty means, you have to look not at the ECJ and not at all the other distractions, but you have to look at the Vienna Convention on the law of treaties. And what this treaty clearly purports to do is impose obligations on a third party which is not party to the treaty. The obligations are imposed, or they seek to impose, obligations on the EU institutions, which were not party to the negotiations, because this was an intergovernmental treaty carried out by the heads of state and government, acting as heads of state and government and not as part of the European Council. So on the one hand, they are arguing, or they are seeking to impose obligations. The second part is that they are making promises which they can't keep. In other words, there's no ability to execute that treaty, which in turn also invalidates it. And you're looking at Articles 34 and 61 of the Vienna Convention, which invalidates the treaty. And therefore, whatever he wants to say to us, whatever he comes back with, he has not got a legally binding treaty. And therefore, if it's not legally binding, it can't be irreversible. It's just a tatty bit of toilet paper. And as such, make no mistake of it, we laugh at the naivety of the 75 referendum about how they took in Wilson's schmuck and believed it. And here we are again, looking down the nose of a fraud, an open, naked fraud. And mostly the media have bought it, the parliamentarians have bought it, the campaign groups have bought it in the sense that they're not fighting it, they're not calling it out as a fraud, and we're left hanging as if he had something worth having. Okay, let's look briefly then at the offer. The Leave Alliance vision, which I've pointed out to you, it doesn't take much to get behind it, and it basically runs to a few things. We get hung up with the Norway option, the moronic, Johnson with his Canadian option, the Swiss option, the Sierra Leone option, the Australian option, the polar Icelandic option, you name it. We don't care. It's a means to an end. What are we after? We're after a single market. We haven't got a single market. We've got a customs union with a bit of single market tagged on the outside under the EEA, but we haven't got a genuine single market. Let's create one. Funny enough, Churchill, at the Hague Conference in 1947, spoke of a hierarchical system under the United Nations, and that's where we're going to go, and that's what phase 3 is when we look at it. We need also to be an enhanced global trading scenario, and we need to be central players in it. For all the talk, for all GATT, for all WTO, conducting international trade is now more expensive at the moment than it was when GATT started. We've got rid of the tariffs, and we've got all the bleatings about tariffs, yet while average tariff is just under 3% globally, the average cost of NTBs, as they're known technically, non-tariff barriers, which have replaced the tariffs, are now over 20%. So in fact, one scourge has replaced another, and we've got this huge problem of NTBs, which require a completely new way of looking at global trade, and nobody apart from us is actually doing it. Then finally, and I saw today on the net one particular MP saying, we must restore the powers to the Parliament, and we must restore parliamentary democracy. Well, I've never had parliamentary democracy. And of course, the whole point is that the parliamentarians gave away our powers, and now they're sitting on their backsides saying that we should go out and restore the powers to them so that they can have them. Where do we gain? What do we get out of it? All we're doing is giving them the powers back, which they gave away. We want those powers, they're our powers, and we have to cement in a system that stops them ever doing it again, otherwise it was never worth starting in the first place. We're back where we started, within years, possibly. Now, let's look at our reassurance. Flexit. That's what it's about, and it stands. It wasn't accidental. Exit is embedded in there, but it's flexible, and it's continuous. In other words, leaving is a process, and it doesn't just stop when we get out. We've got 40 plus years of integration to undo. It's going to take a long time, and it requires a lot of thinking and a lot of careful, measured steps. In fact, it has to be phased, and what we will actually see is that it takes 6 phases. Now, I didn't put them up, but I can tell you them in one sentence. And I was told that 6 phases was far too much for, our brave nation to consider, until I pointed out that it takes 7 phases to become a professional pianist. And of course, 6 phases. What do? You get out by whatever means. You sort out immigration, the 3 levels of problem that we have, not just 1, but 3. You then go towards developing a credible, genuine single market. You then sort out all the hundreds of policy areas that have fallen into disrepair as a result of our membership of the EU, such as CAP, CFP, but also environment and hundreds of others. You then have to turn around and look carefully at your global trade, which is what I've been talking about, and then finally you have to sort out your internal democracy and revitalise internal democracy to make it a proper democracy instead of this charade that we're dealing with at the moment. When the Prime Minister stands up and says, look, chaps, it took 7 years to negotiate CETA, of course he's right. And of course, if you remember, going back in your history, it's one of the advantages of having actually written a history of the European Union. The first phase, in the 60s, when Macmillan with Heath tried to get in and failed, they spent years discussing butter quotas. And the very fact on the second round, the successful round, if you remember, what they said is we do not want to get bogged down in detail. If we start this line, we will be here for years, the impetus will have been lost, and we'll get nowhere. So if you remember that famous deadly phrase, we have to go in, swallow it whole, swallow it now. Take whatever we can get in order to get in, we'll sort out the problems. Well, we're simply going to do the reverse. If we sit down now and look for the perfect solution, it's never going to happen. So what we do is we take what we can get, we get out, and then from a position of strength, from joining EFTA or whatever other mechanisms are appropriate to us at the time, we will then continue the continuous process of restoring our global position. But we are not going to do a brand new, all singing, all dancing, new FTA all within the space of 2 years. It just ain't going to happen. It's never happened. And to attempt to do so is suicide, short only of the phenomenal stupidity of suggesting that we can do a WTO option. Now, what we are trying to do, and it will work, ladies and gentlemen, it's all set out here, is we must stop looking for these magnificent financial benefits. There's not going to be any in the short term. But there's going to be no loss. The central point of leaving is to restore democracy and to correct a historical mistake. There was never any need to throw in our lot with a supranational construct whose ambition was and still is a United States of Europe. We can do business with Europe without having to be part of the United States of Europe, and to get out, we can do a transitional stage, a measured exit, which in its first phases will be neither positive nor negative. The day after we leave will be the same as the day before we leave, and only over a period of years do we diverge and become a more prosperous, more successful nation, but still working closely with our European friends and allies. Now, how are we going to do that? Now, we've heard from the table, and Peter focused, of course, on the internet. Now, we cannot reach millions of people by traditional means. Most of us here have done the stumps and gone out canvassing, knocked on doors. We've all got that apprenticeship, and we know how little it actually affects. It's necessary, but how little it actually affects the final result. Seasoned campaigners will tell you that a good local campaign on a constituency basis perhaps buys you 5% of the vote, if you're lucky, and that's a good campaign. And we need a lot bigger than that. Implementation, therefore, is going to have to be differently managed. Now, as a small group, we have a vision, which is, and I avoided using the picture because it might have been misinterpreted. But if you recall Rorke's Drift, and when the Zulus finally surmounted the barriers and were close to taking over the whole mission, Lieutenant Chard had formed within the perimeter a strategic reserve, his own strategic reserve, a third of his force hidden behind mealie bags, so that as the troops fell back in disarray, up popped the reserve with their rifles to save the day. And this is how we regard ourselves, a small force that are husbanding our forces and directed them with precision to where it's needed, when it's needed, in a way that is most effective. And what we've devised is to use, and this is the first EU referendum, of course, there's only been two, this is the second, but it's the first which will be an internet referendum. And it's the first, I think, where internet will be actually designed as a core tool within the referendum. And we designed a cascade system. Top-level blogs and the bloggers' army. They are the providers of information, and even then there's a hierarchy within the blogs. We have high-level providers, medium-level providers, and then close-to providers, who then feed into social media, and then we feed into publications like this, and then there's this wonderful term, which I did love, was human interface. We actually go and talk to people occasionally and have real-life sort of human interface. There's that lovely word, I love it. But there you go. The point being that 90% of households are already internet-enabled. We can reach 90% without leaving our living rooms. We can work, and if you think about it, EU referendum already talks routinely daily to 25,000 people. We have overall, including sporadic visitors, perhaps a reach of 50 to 100,000. Between our cascade bloggers and our social media, we're reaching between 100,000 and 200,000, and that's at the beginning of the campaign. By the end of the campaign, when we see that interest enhances, our reach will be easily 500,000. And I know this to be the case. There's been times when I've really hit the button on EU referendum and I've been doing 200,000 hits a day. So it can happen. And with our bloggers' army, we have 14 now, and we're taking volunteers. And very good they are indeed. We can easily, routinely reach that 100,000 and then magnify it over the time, where we can really have an effect, a spearhead effect, where it matters, because unlike so much and so many, we actually know what we're talking about, and we have a strategy, and we are directed, and we understand where we're going and what's needed. So, with that, we are the Leave Alliance. We are the campaign that is going to do the sweeping up, where in another sense, the man with the brush sweeping up after the Lord Mayor's show. But if that's too downbeat a line, the real upbeat line is, if we're going to win this, and I'm fighting to win, it's going to be us that win it. It's not going to be the millions spent on wasted activities and on shining egos. It's going to be people who know what they're doing, intelligently applying information to inform their fellow people. And it is going to be a dialogue of people, between people, about things that matter to people, and it's that that's going to win. Instead of the politicians' prattle, it's going to be people to people about people. Thank you, gentlemen, ladies.
So, once again, thank you all for coming. And if you're really serious about leaving the EU, which will allow the UK to take the rightful place at the world's top table, then we believe we need a comprehensive staged plan to leave, which Flexit offers. Finally, our route is to open the door, that is, as you saw, D-O-R, by debunking, offering and reassuring the public that there is a way to leave the EU safely. Thank you very much indeed.